Perfect. Perfect. Because I'm going to watch this video later on as well. Cool.
Okay, then I will try to share my screen. Let's see.
Do you want me to share instead?
I think I'm about to do it. I was just trying to download it instead of using the Google Chrome, Google Doc. Okay, can you see my screen at the moment?
Yes.
Okay. So our title is Fear and Loathing During the Pandemic. What determines people's tastes of music consumption during COVID-19? For some reason, the second part of the title is missing here. So we wanted to ask two main broad questions. One of them was related to people's consumption of culture. We wanted to understand how that changes according to a very important macro historical change, such as the current pandemic. We were curious to see whether there were drastic shifts in what is popular in music. And then we also thought we could think about what people listen to as an indicator of their well-being, and we wanted to see whether their well-being changes according to how the pandemic unfolds. So to answer these questions, we thought that we could think about a theoretical framework that comes from cultural sociology, comparative politics, and also social policy and sociology of markets, because we were interested in two broad questions. So in terms of cultural consumption, there are two main convictions in the literature. One of them is that people's tastes are durable and they don't necessarily change according to external shocks because they acquire them early on in life. Their habits and dispositions are part of like their education, their family, their social class. It's part of their cultural and social capital, and it doesn't change. The other theoretical conviction is kind of like the opposite of this, and it says that people's tastes change by external conditions. We see different tastes in different cohorts, in different age groups, and in different periods. So political, social changes and external shocks do affect what people like in terms of their cultural consumption. Another thing that we took from the literature about subjective well-being is people have like self-reports of their subjective well-being. One of them is their self-reported happiness. Their happiness is explained by political and social systems. These include like income inequality in a certain country, unemployment level, the social support in a certain country, whether there's interpersonal trust, whether the quality of government is good or not, in terms of like people's religiosity, people's education, and so on. And we also took from the literature that says that people's consumption of music says something about their psychologies. It's related to people's emotions and affects. So building from these literatures, we wanted to have some kind of a case selection. We're obviously in the very beginning of this, but we started with UK and Turkey. We mainly focused on like the healthcare systems and the political regime and welfare states. I just put like 3 examples of like what's in these literatures. So like in the UK, there's the healthcare system is like so much better than Turkey. Obviously, the income inequality is better than Turkey as well. It's a far more equal country. And then we thought like by looking at the literature in the next steps of our research, we could also include Germany and Sweden because they represent different ideal types in this literature. I'm not going to go into these details, but this is something we're at the moment working on. And then I want to leave the floor to Hakan to describe our data sources for what we did in the last.
Thank you, Yasemin. And thank you very much. Can you keep the slides or shall I share on my side?
I can keep the slides. I can just go on if you'd like.
So what we did was, I mean, at least for until today, basically. So we have mainly collected data from Spotify and Genius. So what we did was the Spotify itself actually provides the playlists of top 200 songs by week. So we collected this data from a period that precedes the COVID, basically, which is the 1st of November 2019. And we collected these weekly tables, top 200 tables, until 18th June on 2021 for UK and Turkey. What is nice is that the Spotify provides you with an API that allows you to get something called a track features. So we get all these track features for the tracks we collected, which was over 1,200 unique songs in Turkey and over 1,800 unique songs in UK. And these track features, for example, can tell you how much danceable the song is or how much the mood is basically a positive or negative, which they call it a balance of the song, for example. So this kind of represents our first initial starting point for looking how these things changes. And then we also wanted to have some more handle on the content of this song. So we also used the Genius, which is the largest lyric database. And we used their API and the R package to connect our songs to collect the lyrics data for our songs. So after collecting this data, we did a few things. First of all, we of course did some data viz and data visualization, which you will see now. But in addition, we also did some topic modeling onto it. And for now, we use the STM package, but without really much metadata. So it's just a normal LDA, more or less, in this point. And we also did some OLS regressions as a starting point to understand how these dynamics have changed across these countries. So when we look across the topics within the Turkey, we were surprised in the sense that basically some of these music topics were kind of new to us. So we see some of the very classic Turkish pop in the topic 6 or topic 8, which topic 8 represents more like a summer Turkish pop. It becomes more obvious during the summer times. But then we were very interested, for example, to see that the topic 3 or topic 4 actually becoming very popular, especially during the lockdown period, for example. And they represent kind of, for example, intoxication. If you look at the words, it says kafa and Leyla, you know, kafa Leyla, which means, you know, my head is good now in Turkish, in case like. And so it was quite interesting for us to see this kind of small niches of music, you know, getting very popular. And of course, we need something more broader, maybe going back to see if it is really a COVID-induced period, you know, bump, or is it general, the evolution of the tastes in Turkey. And now if you look at the changes, like if you look at the topics we find for the UK, basically, in UK, well, what is interesting is, of course, you have a topic 3, for example, the Christmas. So in December, we see a huge increase in the streams. And then we realize, okay, we see that the Christmas songs become super popular during the period. But even apart from that, we had actually a mixed bag here, which has these more popular musics, but also has some of these more, you know, aggressive musics also coming, you know, becoming quite popular during this period. And I think now we have the graphs and the OLSs done by Elif.
Okay, so here I will focus on certain characteristics of the songs, the top 50 playlists that the Spotify data gave us. We didn't have the time to merge those with the like macroeconomical, like more structural data, like we were planning to, but this is just like a quick snapshot of what's happening in the top 50 playlists between November 2019 and like last week, basically. So here, what you see is weeks leading to now, beginning with, again, November 2019, and the valence of the songs. If it's a 1, it's a positive valence, and if it's a 0, it's a negative valence. And you see that the data is clustering near like the midpoint, but you also see that UK tends to have a higher valence overall, and this was like higher all through the time. Here at week 10, you see this is the end of 2019, so the pandemic is starting here. And here is the second year. So this is the January of 2020. So this is how it's going on pre and after the pandemic. So okay, so I just did a regular regression, and what we found was, again, UK tended to have a significantly higher valence overall. And as time passed, the valence of the music that was listened to increased over across two countries, but notice that this is big data, and it's a very, very small coefficient. It is significant, and we do have a high R-squared, but proceed with caution. So like we are thinking to take a look at like maybe like a bigger picture, like with more time, we'll see. But there is a significant increase towards like people listening to more positive songs as time passed, and we got into deeper and deeper into the pandemic, basically. Could you proceed, Yasemin? So this is funny. There is a measure called danceability, and it's literally like the tempo of the song and like how like the song, like the words, and like how likely you are to dance to that song. And here you see that although we tended to listen to more negative songs when it comes to danceability, maybe it's the Mediterranean fire coming in, but it's basically similar. And here during Christmas time, you see there's a decrease in the UK. And this is, I think, the like full lockdown we had right before we started getting vaccinated. So that's the only time that Turkish people were so down that they listened to less danceable songs than the British people. So this is what's happening in our data. Yasemin, could you proceed? And so this is the tempo of the songs, which leads to like a, I think, pretty interesting thing where, again, we're listening to more upbeat songs than the British people. But what we find here is that there's not much variance, there's not much shift over time for the British people, but Turkish people are getting down. So like the tempo of the songs that we listen to is going down. And Yasemin, if you can proceed, we can see that in a regression where over time, British people, the tempo of their songs, which is BPM, I think, is stable, where it's decreasing for the Turkish people. And again, that's this interaction. It is significant, and the estimate is not that high, but it is there. And again, the R-squared is not that bad either. So we think that this might be because of the way the two countries handled pandemic, especially throughout the end, where you see the decrease is like more prominent. We haven't had a good vaccination process. The lockdowns were happening still while the world was healing. So maybe like the pandemic blues got the Turkish people down because of these like larger macroeconomical, like macro structures. You can proceed, Yasemin. Okay.
So we had like two different projects in mind, and we, by eyeballing our data set, like apart from the things we showed you, we also tried to do some like regression analysis with like what we have. We looked through like all types of different moods and like different types of data Spotify provides us. And we thought like we could extend our cases either by doing a case selection that are representative of like different political and social systems so that we can control for different variables that explains the types of differences in these cases. And then we could also extend our sources because there are all these different sources that gives us music data, such as Bandcamp, such as Shazam, and then Twitter and YouTube, where in Twitter people share what they listen to, and then in YouTube they also like stream music and then they comment on it. So we could, apart from collecting more data on music, we could also collect more data on how people interact with the music by using actual words. And then we were planning to include more like macro level indicators. We started collecting them, but we didn't put them together because we didn't have enough time for that. And then obviously we could come up with a better well-being indicator by using what we have in the topic modeling, and then by looking at the sentiments in the lyrics and in music, because for now what we use is the sentiment, let's say the sentiments or the moods that Spotify provides us with. And then we could think of a better model to predict changes in people's music taste, because for now we were eyeballing our data set, but we were really excited about what we're doing, and we definitely want to pursue this project further. We want to end our presentation with a Umut caricature, I will say. We believe like we're at the beginning of doing some like really interesting and exciting research. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be happy to hear your questions if you have any, and have your comments and like any types of contribution you could have.
That's wonderful. Let me use my clap reaction for you. That's so interesting. So in order to kickstart the discussion and comments, so the format that I'm thinking is that one group presents, we discuss that, and then the other group. Because if we do all presentations together and then get all questions, then it's going to be unmanageable. So first thing is, this is so important because when you guys first started this, I was very excited because we're living in a COVID world, and we spend more time online, and especially we spend more time in places like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as well. And definitely Spotify is one of those places where we actually spend significantly more time during the COVID period as opposed to pre-COVID period. So the first, I think it's probably like very obvious for you, but one, how would you go about addressing the problem of Spotify penetration? Not all countries have similar levels of Spotify use. Some of them, I don't know. In Turkey, it's popular, but I'm not saying that Spotify has to be like nationally representative in any country. But of course, in certain countries, 20% of the people, let's say, would listen to Spotify. In another country, it's 8%, and in other countries, it's like 60%. It's like comments slash question, but like also to get you think about this. Like, how do we start building a model that is going to basically put all of those different Spotify access measures into some kind of perspective?
I can comment that for a second. There already is a difference in the raw streaming scores I checked. And so like there already is like, maybe it's the population, maybe it's demographics, like how it is distributed, but there is a difference like that in our data. And we did take a look to see if Spotify had any sort of demographics or like they shared like what percentage of their like users were like family users or like student users, which person, like gender wise, like class wise, it wasn't available. So we were thinking of asking them nicely first, like to like lead us to any sort of information available there. But if not, I mean, that's something that we can acknowledge straightforward and sort of maybe leeway, like sort of have leeways where like this is the big data approach that we're having, and sort of maybe implementing that with like other YouTube or like Twitter data where the demographics is slightly different. Maybe that could be a way out, but it's just we don't have the information for the difference between UK and Turkey in terms of demographic information, demographic data.
Yeah, it's just something to think about. So I think Venia was next. Venia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really fun and interesting presentation, and lovely to see that we are getting more depressed right now. But yeah, so one question that I had was, I guess thinking about it from like an artist level. Let's say that I'm Drake. I'm not Drake, but let's say that I'm Drake and I record an artist, like a song 8 months ago. Then after a long process of releasing it, then after I finally release it when COVID starts and my song explodes, doesn't talk about COVID, not impacted in COVID in the production, but still this valence becomes like #1 and like a lot of people listen to it. Is there a, like, are you concerned of like new music that just explodes affecting the underlying valence or the underlying factors? Is there a way, so I know you're working with the top 200 tracks, is there a way of just like having a static sample of songs that like are representative of specific things and working with that? At that point, you have to get the user listening habits of those songs, but maybe a bit more difficult.
May I answer? the team? Yeah. So Venia, that's a very good point, because I normally in my other works, I work a lot with the video game data. And that's a big concern there, right? Because it takes a time to develop the games and release to the market. And in this case, you are right in the sense that on the supply side, of course, there's a production time going on, and with big names, it's a long time. I think there are two ways to address. One is indeed to get more pre-COVID trends and see whether there are COVID-specific new entrants that are changing this mood, right? So is it because of these? So it's the supply side story, or if it is really a demand side story, such that the pool of the songs are the same, but people are now more depressed. I think that's exactly what you are asking, if I think about it in terms of regression. And I think one way is for us to go back further in the data and also to have a larger pool of songs so that we can see whether indeed the supply reacts to these with particular songs, or whether indeed we can, take out this noise and see whether demand really changes. But of course, it's a two-sided matching happening here. So it's a classic regression problem happening here. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. So next up was Meri Hocam. Meri Hocam, hello. She's a friend of our Summer Institute, and she was one of our speakers last year. So yeah, floor is yours. Great to see you.
Thank you very much, Hocam. Well, first of all, let me start by saying kudos to the team for conducting this really fantastic research. I really enjoyed listening to it. I mean, also as compared to, all the political economy works that we've been exposed to, which are not necessarily so fun to listen to regarding the pandemic. This was actually really refreshing. And I have two questions, which are probably emanating from my ignorance about this, the sociology of music taste and culture and all that. What I noticed was that, well, first of all, I probably would fall into an outlier category if my Spotify was actually in your sample, because since the pandemic started, I'm exclusively listening to Christmas songs. That's random. But I mean, since there is actually, I think, a really negative correlation between the sort of joy that I try to get from the songs and my moods. The more I'm depressed, the more joyful songs I try to listen to. But that's, again, I mean, I don't really know the existing literature on this, so I may as well be an outlier. What could be also considered, I think, as the premium membership when you look at Spotify. People who are more serious about using the service on a daily basis tend to actually get the premium membership. That also, I guess, refers to the income group, regardless of which country you're looking at. Premium membership users tend to be people not belonging to the lower segment income, of the society. Again, I don't have a premium membership, but I'm really stingy. That also puts me in an outlier position again. But in any case, I would assume that might also be a parameter to consider. So another thing I had in mind while looking at your OLS regression results was that, I mean, you do have satisfactorily high R-squared. The goodness of fit can also still be questioned, I thought, because, I mean, you're looking at, for example, the danceability, the tempo of the song as a dependent variable. But I wonder if you may as well actually go for a maximum likelihood estimation, put your categories in a logistic regression, and then on the right-hand side, you have all the other independent variables that you showed to us, still keep them. It would be interesting to see what results we would get out from that. But I mean, again, fantastic research. I really enjoy, I mean, I'm looking forward to reading the paper itself. So thank you very much. I'll pause here.
Thank you. I can answer the regression part, which is regular linear regression was what I did when I woke up in the morning, and more advanced regressions are definitely, like, I didn't have the time to do that, but that's definitely a better way of making the model. And in terms of Christmas, it's funny because there is a very salient cultural difference between Turkey and UK, especially around Christmas time. Like, the streaming goes boom in UK. It's normal in Turkey, and the danceability goes really down in UK, but it stays the same in Turkey, for example. So I think people in the UK during Christmas time are listening to sad-ish, less danceable Christmas songs. So that's just a tidbit. So maybe you do belong in the like more UK outlier group, maybe.
Maybe I've been exposed to too much of that UK culture earlier. It might
maybe.
be that.
In terms of sociology, that's I'm the psychologist here. So, but I think if you are sad, listening to the Christmas song, that takes you back to like your childhood, all those happy memories. That for me is the explanation, but I don't know the sociological explanation.
So when we were initially discussing this, like what to do with this data, something we were interested in was like measuring the changes. If we had more like longitudinal data, we could actually see the differences in behavior at the aggregate level. We can't really see it at the user level. I mean, just looking at the data we have at the moment, but we can see the changes in the aggregate level. And if there are so drastic changes, like if someone was listening to death metal like 3 years ago, and then is now just listening to like Christmas songs, like that change, if we come up with some kind of a measure to say that like there's this swing in people's tastes, this is like unexpected when we look at the previous years, then we have like something really interesting going on in terms of people's self-reported well-being. So obviously I can't really answer your question because we're brainstorming on this project at the moment. But thank you very much for all of your comments. Another thing that I would probably, this is also an answer to the previous questions, is this is also why we want to have different sources. Like we found some data on which countries use which platforms to listen to music the most, even though we don't know about their social class. We know that some countries use like YouTube, some countries use Spotify, some countries use other like platforms. So if we have all these different sources, then we could also check our results.
Perfect. So next up, another friend of our Summer Institute, Onur Varol Hocam. Great to see you as well. Hello and welcome.
Hello everyone. Merhaba Hocam. Merhaba Emre. So I believe this today we will have like fantastic talks, and this is just the first one, and that's really a great job. So I also some couple of questions / suggestions for the future work. So I have the same instinct with Mary Hoca. So if things are going bad, I'll probably try to find some uplifting music to kind of like cheer myself up. So since Spotify is a great source of like these cultural proxies, there could be other different ways of looking at the same data, right? Like maybe one is like how much time we spend on Spotify. Since during the COVID, we are working at home, maybe I spend more time on Spotify. Or maybe I have playlists on, let's say, running and exercise musics. So maybe I spent less time on listening to those and then maybe listening something else. So that could be, I think, different aspects of Spotify data to look into. And when I look at the OLS results for the 60-week period, one thing that I'm kind of like concerned is, so this is a long period of time. So when UK is returning back to normal, we were worried about like having the second wave. So it's definitely not a, let's say, there are several cycles over this 60-week period. So maybe OLS may not be the best approach to kind of like see the differences from the beginning to the end, but maybe something more continuous or more fine-grained over the time. And one thing that I can recommend is like looking at a alternative proxy, let's say the case numbers in the UK and case numbers in the Turkey, and comparing them with a type of analysis like a Granger causality. So if one time series is driving to the another. So kind of like putting into more in a spin of like causal claim, being able to make a causal claim could be an alternative things. So that's kind of like my comment, but that's great. So
could you repeat the analysis that you mentioned, because I'm not familiar with?
Oh yeah,
it.
So it is called Granger's causality. So I can type it into chat as well.
That would be amazing, thank you. I am an experimental psychologist, so I do cute little ANOVAs and go on with that, with my experiments. So linear regression was like, just like that.
But isn't it what makes this summer school so
exciting?
Exactly. So
thank you.
I can talk with a psychologist as a computer scientist, and there are computer scientists among and then there are different various disciplines. So that's super great. So
thank you.
All right. So perfect. I mean, guys, really like this is really amazing, and I'm really looking forward to also seeing this first as a presentation paper in a conference, and then hopefully as a journal article. So let's move on to the second presentation, which is the COVID vaccine group. I'm assuming it's about COVID sentiments. I'm not sure. So let's move on to the second presentation.
Can I share right now? Or can I
You
guess? Okay.
should.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
So let's begin. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. So we made a research on the COVID vaccine perception in Turkey, and we used Twitter data to extract public opinion in general. And we are 4 people coming from different backgrounds, and we used our differences as a driving force of our research. So our motivation was, since the very beginning of the pandemic, we ask ourselves and the authorities, when will the pandemic end, and when will we back to our normal lives? And here the vaccines play a crucial role, because they speed up the process. And we wanted to since the emergence of the first vaccines, we started to talk more and more about the vaccines. That's why we wanted to investigate the differences in the nomenclatures of vaccines. What I mean is, we sometimes call the same vaccine Sinovac, or maybe we can call it Chinese vaccine or CoronaVac. But even though they are the same, we may use them differently. And we investigated that. And also, we wanted to examine whether international media outlets such as BBC News or Al Jazeera and these kind of international media outlets in Turkey operate as soft power devices for promoting some certain vaccines. And another question we asked to the data is, we wanted to investigate the bot activity on Twitter in vaccine-related tweets, and also we wanted to inspect the frequency of pronoun usage in tweets and their reflected sentiments. And while we are doing these all researches, we use sentiment analysis in each step. So we are going to see in detail. And we collected our data from Twitter, as I said before, and we just took the Turkish tweets, and also we determined our keywords by just eyeball checking in a manual way, and we also used a data-driven approach by using word-to-vec method. And we came up with these keywords to include all possible versions of vaccines, all possible keywords. So I'm going to skip this for now because it's in detail, but we are going to see this step by step. So this is the timeline in Turkey about in the COVID-19 period, and in 2020 March 11th, it was, I guess, every Turkish would remember this date, because we had this first COVID-19 case, and Fahrettin Koca announced that, etc. And from that point of time to November 2020, we didn't use any keywords related to vaccines because we didn't have any vaccine. And but after announcement of indigenous vaccine studies and announcement of the Sinovac deal, we started to use keywords related to vaccines. And as you can see here, we see the monthly occurrences in the y-axis, and all these keywords were used in the same way. I mean, they were occurred in the same frequencies, and we didn't have any consensus about saying BioNTech, but not saying Pfizer. And we have this peak here after the announcement of Sinovac deal and the arrivals of Pfizer BioNTech vaccines and Sinovac vaccines, and again in April, after the reimpose of lockdowns and BioNTech vaccines have arrived, we have another peak, and we see that over time we started to use BioNTech and Sinovac rather than using Chinese vaccine or German vaccine or Pfizer. So, and we made a sentiment analysis on these different nomenclatures, and the top left one shows the general sentiment on vaccine related keywords, and we see that this is it is going positive all the time. But as we were hypothesizing that while BioNTech and Pfizer, while using these kind of words for calling the vaccines, it would be more positive than calling them German vaccine, for example, or calling them Chinese vaccine, because when we call them Chinese vaccine or German vaccine or Russian vaccine, we make a reference to the politics, and that's a negative sentiment. That makes a negative sentiment in general, and data showed us that it's real. And as you can see here, when talking about BioNTech or Pfizer, people tend to be more positive, and while people are mentioning the vaccine as German vaccine, it's more negative. And this is the case for also Sinovac and Sputnik 5, because when we call Sinovac the vaccine, it's positive rather than negative, and when we call it Chinese vaccine, it's negative. So I'm going to leave the floor to Umut right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Here we looked at the foreign media channels that have Turkish Twitter accounts. The reason why we chose the foreign media accounts is there is this understanding that the Turkish media is not transparent and not neutral. Therefore, these foreign media channels creates an alternative for Turkish society to be informed. However, it comes with one negative side. These are often state-backed media channels. Therefore, we would like to investigate whether these foreign media channels can be used as like soft power devices by their countries of origin. That's why we included them here, and we would like to look at how these media channels covered their news. And one thing to note here is they mentioned Sinovac vaccine as Chinese vaccine on a couple of occasions, on a couple of, you can see the coverages here by the green color, but there are no signs of mentioning the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine as German vaccine or the Sputnik vaccine as the Russian vaccine. It is a one result that we have. In general, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is covered more by all media channels. It is followed by Sinovac. Another important thing here is two Middle Eastern-based media channels, El Monitor and Irna Turkce, they have not covered any vaccine news related to Turkey or in general. They just left the vaccine news out of their scopes and gave more political news instead. And another thing to note here is when we look at the Xinhua News of China and CRI, we can see that they spend more coverage. They spend relatively more coverage to the Sinovac vaccine than the other sources. One important thing here is the Sputnik 5 vaccine situation. It is shown with the yellow color here. And it is interesting because only the Sputnik Turkish have covered Sputnik 5 vaccine a lot, and the other media sources does not seem to be interested in Sputnik 5, which can be interpreted as the distrust to the Russian government, we believe. And we also conducted a sentiment analysis using the, we combined the keywords for every vaccine. For example, China vaccine here it's categorical variable for combined keywords such as the Çin aşısı, such as Sinovac, Coronavac, and etc. So here we can see that the only time, also I would like to say that the scale we have is from 1 to -1. Therefore, all the sentiments here are positive. And we can see that only the Xinhua News of China has mentioned the Chinese related vaccine news relatively positive than other sources. You can see it on the top right corner. And you can see that Western media sources such as BBC Türkçe, Deutsche Welle, and The Independent have positive, relatively more positive sentiments towards the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, which is again shown with the German vaccine sentiment. And about the Russian, the general sentiment is again positive. However, it is relatively less positive. The only relatively more positive sentiment comes from, again, the Sputnik TR, which is not surprising, we believe. And then we collected data and create a neural network. We used a neural network-based model, Doc2Vec, to get the vector representations of the media channels. And then we computed the similarities between each pair of vectors to use as the edges on the media sources network, and came up with this map. And here you can see the division between the Western media and Eastern media very clearly as a diagonal, two diagonal sides. Thank you.
We also wanted to look at bot activity during this period in order to see whether we can observe any artificial support constructed by bots towards different vaccines. For bot detection, we used Botometer Lite version. And since we had over 600,000 tweets with more than 200,000 unique users, we subsampled the users in our data set. Prior to subsampling, we decided to search for bot activity for the data after November 2020, as this period remarks the rapid increase in vaccine-related conversations on Twitter in Turkey. Furthermore, bots often deactivate their accounts after a certain period, or they can be removed by Twitter itself. Therefore, we expect that the analysis of the accounts being active in the recent past produce more reliable results. So after clearing our data set, we did random subsampling and checked the bot scores of 16,000 users. We determined the cutoff as 0.5, which means accounts having higher than 0.5 row bot score is considered as a bot. Here you can see from the graph on the upper left corner, we detected over 3,000 tweets sent by 1,031 bot accounts. During May 2021, almost 20% of the vaccine-related content was produced by bots. Furthermore, we separately checked the bots in each topic and found out that tweets about BioNTech Pfizer vaccine were occupied with the highest number of bots. Although the highest number of ratio of bot activity was detected for Sputnik 5, the size of our data was significantly lower, as Sputnik 5 has just recently started to become a popular discussion on Turkish Twitter. We also looked at the sentiment of the tweets that were sent by bots. Here we found more positive sentiment in content generated by bots when the vaccine is mentioned with the company names. Furthermore, we found that bots create more anti-vaccine content when the vaccine is mentioned with the country name, which we can argue that bots were motivated to attack the national identity rather than the vaccine itself. However, the case is a bit different with the Russian vaccine. So here we see a strong sentiment for both Sputnik 5 and Russian vaccine keywords. This signals a potential organized Russian propaganda, maybe, but as I mentioned, we don't have enough data to strongly support this claim yet. This can be further investigated with also using different methods such as social network analysis, so we can detect if there is a organized bot activity. And also bot activity is not limited to tweeting. So they also amplify content, and it will be convenient to look at how detected bot accounts interact with other user tweets. I think, Ege, you can proceed.
Then we look at the pronouns. We use the Zeyrek package from the Zemberek, and we examined 487,000 tweets. And we examine the verbs because in Turkish, we do not explicitly report the pronouns in the sentences. We expect to find more first-person pronouns in negative tweets. However, we didn't observe that. So we find in all sentiments, in negative, positive, and neutral sentiments, the third-person pronoun is used more. After then third person, the second person pronoun is used. Then the least one is the first person pronoun. We can explain it with two results. First one is the Chan and Baker study about in stressful situations, people tend to use second and third person pronouns more, or we can basically explain it with the discourse of the Twitter. When we're tweeting, we do not say I like BioNTech, but not like I like, but we do not say I think BioNTech is bad, but say BioNTech is bad, because it's obvious that we are tweeting, and when we are saying our opinions, we do not explicitly say our pronouns when we're tweeting. And maybe that's why we find more third person sentences in the all over. But to understand it better, I think as a future work, we need to examine what's the general trend in the Twitter discourse, rather than only looking at the vaccine tweets. So we need to do more content analysis, and we need to see the different results of the comparison tweets. And when we look at the sentiment, third and first person tweets were mostly negative, and second person tweets are mostly positive. But overall, people report negative sentiment when they use the pronouns. It can be explained as that second person perspective is used when we direct our argument toward the person or people, but it can be positive because this person are closer to our in-group. However, when we express our ideas to a third person or people, because it's out-group, we are more free to say negative things. Maybe that's why. We can go to the other slide. So all in all, in our study, we see that public perception on different vaccines are more volatile. It differs according to the public events. For example, the vaccination of Fahrettin Koca. Definitely we need to look at the future data sets after the completion of the vaccination. Also, we see that country-named vaccines are perceived as more negative compared to the brand names. And maybe people are abasing the nations as a methodology when they are positing their negative attitude toward the vaccine. And we also find that foreign media generally talk about BioNTech and Pfizer and report Sinovac as a Chinese vaccine. The attitudes of media also differ, and we see that Western media kind of partial about non-Western vaccines. We can see the followers of specific channels and their attitude toward the vaccine to observe the influence of the media channels on people. And we look at the pronouns. Again, we need to look at a more general data set about tweets to see the general trend of the Twitter discourse. And we also use several sentiment analysis models, and we didn't like them too much. So we think that fine-tuning these models is a good idea for our future work. And lastly, 17% of the tweets are sent by the bot accounts. It's a huge number. And BioNTech and Pfizer bots are more than other bot accounts. The bots are mostly positive, but the nation-name vaccines are mostly, again, negative. It can be the same methodology of bots by basing the nations with their names. So we can examine the network of bots, operation of bots with a simultaneous bot detection in real-time web scraping, because bots can distinguish themselves, destroy themselves. So it's the end of our presentations. We are happy to answer any questions you have.
Fascinating. This was This is really interesting. And I was actually like thinking about doing a similar project like this, but you guys were faster than me, and this is really, really, really impressive. Well, there's some bird trying to ask questions. So my question is, what do you think bot activity in Turkey is, skewed in the direction of Pfizer and BioNTech? Because that's so interesting. Normally, like, what do we know about the bot literature? Most bots are being, created and fueled by authoritarian countries in order to destabilize democratic countries. But now that, based on your presentation, I see that there's a different picture here. How would you explain this bot-related incident? Because like I'm really interested in bots, so that's why I'm like genuinely interested in that. Like, why don't we have Sinovac or Sputnik Pro bots that we have Pfizer BioNTech Pro bots? Like, you may not have a finding on this yet, but maybe like some educated guess related to like why.
I can just jump in.
Yeah.
So that was interesting for me as well. So I think that's just my thoughts. So we always think about bots as, as a unity, and it's always like organized attack, but it's actually not that like difficult to produce bots. So I think a good way to explore this is to look at the bot network. So are they organized? Do they jump in at the same time? To see, maybe we can expect more organized bot activity for Russian part, but not for the BioNTech one. So I guess this is one possible way to investigate it. And I guess like bots are becoming more, they're more popular. Now we're like researching about it all the time. So it's becoming like a trend. And we also like witnessed that, like from the previous research, they are not like exclusive to like, we call it like computational propaganda. And it's not only in Russia, it's not only coming from, there's not only Russian bots, they're operating in many different countries. So I guess we have to like change our perception against bots, and also perception against propaganda. So it's not something that a non-democratic country does. So I think it's one way to explain. Maybe.
Yeah, very interesting.
Have an idea, Hocam. Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
It's just a thought. I don't know, but maybe it's about. Before answering your question, maybe it would be better to detect the bots in an international I don't know case. For example, these days, especially, there are some rumors about the side effects of the BioNTech and Pfizer, and that may need Pfizer BioNTech to be elevated somehow, and maybe this is why these bots are used to run a campaign. I don't know. That's a bit conspiracy theory thing, but that's an idea.
Onur Hoca?
Hello everyone. I think that's great. So there are lots of exciting results. So I'm wondering, like, over time, how much the bot activities is changing, especially for Turkey in that case. So one, I don't know, theory hypothesis we can make is maybe when BioNTech or Pfizer vaccine wasn't as popular in Turkey, there wasn't much bot activity, but when they become more accessible, they praised by positive sentiment by the bots. So to kind of like promote people for vaccination, and then it's kind of like a supply demand. Could it be a supply demand between the availability of the vaccines and which countries are providing those vaccines, and how, let's say, if we say Turkey is kind of like behind the bot activities, could we claim they are also trying to manage the expectations? So before Pfizer is available in Turkey, lower the expectations. Once they are available, boost positive sentiment, and then praise the vaccine.
I think here we focus on the percentage of how bots are busying the conversations. So it will be better also to look at from time to time how the number of bots increased. But I guess the problem that we were expecting this, because here you can see like the peak is always in May. So I expect that because they don't, they're not removed from Twitter. So maybe there were more bots at that time as well. But I think we have to do real-time data collection, and we have to detect these tweets before they detect the users. Before they
maybe I misunderstood you, Aybuke. So then here at each month, you are counting how many bots are created in that particular month, or these are the number of tweets or activities by the bots?
Like
so
these
what's
are
the y-axis?
The y-axis is the number of tweets, the number of tweets sent by bots divided by the total tweets of that time.
I see. But you are wondering like whether some of the bots that are active previously are suspended right now. That's why you have a lower bot fraction in the past.
Yes. Am I thinking?
I think that makes sense. So actually, one of the reasons Botometer Lite is good because you can actually check or evaluate already suspended or deleted accounts as well. So the Botometer cannot act on deleted or suspended accounts, but Botometer Lite can only work with the user profile object. So you can actually go back to historical data and do such analysis.
But
we used Botometer before, by the way. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, we did a mistake, a little mistake. Sorry.
Oh, but can I ask something? When, like, if we collected data, we collected it last month. So when, if it's deleted, we were not going to collect that.
Oh, yeah, that's
yes. The problem.
Yeah. I have an assumption that you have some historical data, like a garden hose, and so if it's a Twitter API and you are pulling the data right now, then you are obviously right. So if an account deleted, all the tweets or the content goes with it. So you may not have the bot content from the previous months. That's actually one limitation with the academic API. That's why it's good to kind of like keep an open stream and keep continuous data collection.
Okay. I think Burak is Burak here? Wait, where's Burak? Yeah, Burak. Welcome, Burak. Hi, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello, Onur Hocam, Hakan Hocam, Melih Hocam, Emre, and all of the participants. I just want to ask about the sentiment. Did you do any manual labeling to control that how well the sentiment modeling is working? Do you have any ratio or accuracy level somehow?
I know we don't have an accuracy ratio, but we did an eyeball check actually. We tried different sentiment analysis models on Hugging Face, and we saw that this Kuzgunlar Electra model works the best among them. And yeah, we tried 3 models actually, or 4. Yeah, and we don't have actually an accuracy metric, but we eyeball checked.
Yeah, I tried the Bertuk social one, and for the Sinovac sentiment, it was totally volatile. It's some random model is kind of, so your graph looking smooth, at least better than that. So I just, that's why I want to ask that. Thank you.
Yeah, you are welcome. The reason why our data looks smooth is, I think it's we took the mean of every month, but yours were weekly or daily, I guess.
Mine was daily, yeah.
That's why.
Okay, yeah. That makes sense, yep.
Okay. So any other questions for this particular presentation? No? Okay, so let's then move on to the third topic, perception of conflict project.
Yes. Let me share my screen. Can you see the slide?
Not yet. Now yes.
Okay. The title of our project is Perception of Conflict in the US and UK over the Palestine issue. And here are my group mates. This is our research question. We are looking into the recent Israel-Palestine conflict in the last month. and we ask how the armed conflict changed the topics that people talked, we employ STM since its comparative advantage of informing the model with the metadata. We extracted our data from Twitter by API. And honestly, our initial intention was to carry out user-based ideology estimation of Paul Barbera and combine it with our STM. But unfortunately, in the process, we have noticed that our computers wouldn't allow us to do the former. So we briefly revised our question. The outline of our presentation will be like that. I will present from 1 to 4. Then respectively, Selim and Ahmet Yusuf will be on the floor. Let's start with our keyword selection strategy. To detect relevant keywords, we first started to utilize place names like Jerusalem, Quds, Gaza, Tel Aviv, Sheikh Jarrah. However, then we noticed that we are mostly aware of the hashtags in the pro-Palestine circles because we belong those circles mostly. To avoid a potential selection bias problem, then we looked for the pro-Israel hashtags during the process following the son of Netanyahu, Yair Netanyahu, and accordingly we enlarged our string with some further keywords like Hamas or Jewish. As a second step, we non-automatically manually detected critical turning points during the conflicts. In fact, the event started in April with the problem of settlements, more likely Israel settlers, but tensions in US and UK were not much high at that time. Then the first armed conflict issue happened in the 6th of May. By that, 2 Palestinian civilians were killed by Israeli police forces. And then the second turning points that we extracted was the 10th to 11th of May, when Hamas starts the counterattacks with large number of rockets. And we consider these attacks as the major threshold in our research, since after the 11th of May, armed violent conflicts increased and intensified very fast. And the 21st of May was the date for the ceasefire. So we downloaded tweets by using academic Twitter package for 2 reasons. First, it allows retrospective data collection, and second, the number of tweets would be very high. However, we encountered with some inconsistent errors. Unfortunately, status code was mostly, not always, 503. We tried every alternative way of asking data, but at some ambiguous points, it gave error. For each time, we wrote Christopher Berry, creator of the package, thanks to SICSS organization, and he said the problem seems to be about the Twitter site. Nevertheless, we ran the code for different time ranges and for the 2 countries separately, and then merged them all. But at the end, since we pre-selected countries before asking the tweets, this limited our scope to the users who allow Twitter to reach their geolocation information. So the final sample size that we reached is 57,000 totally. And here you see the tweet frequency during the May. This is hourly change of tweet numbers. It starts to rise with the attacks of Hamas, and with some additional peaks, it decreases to the end of May. This is the summary of our process. And for pre-processing, we did standard operations, removing punctuations, numbers, symbols, stop words, stemming, and transforming to lowercase. But for the stop words, we used smart option as the source, since it covers 2 or 3 times larger numbers of stop words. But more importantly, we divide our sample by the 2 binary variables, the time threshold that shows the attacks of Hamas and the country variable. Before moving towards the models and findings, I will present some descriptive plots here. This is the overall word clouds in our data. to see the overall distribution of words in the data, we used untrimmed version, and we could see the names of actors of the conflict: Israel, Palestine, Jewish, Palestinians, also place names, and some keywords like rockets, hate, bomb, civilian, protest, anti-Semitism, terrorists, etc. And here we divide word clouds with respect to our two variables of interest. The left word cloud shows before and after Hamas attacks, and the one in the right side compares UK and US words. So after the attacks, it seems that Hamas, children, rockets, that kind of words started to be more likely mentioned. And before the threshold, Jewish and Jerusalem were the significant keywords. And for the US-UK comparison, in UK, we could see that sanction, protest, labor, probably for the sake of Labour Party, were mostly counted terms. And in US, again, names of actors are apparently more prominent. We see a similar distribution of terms for the keenness analysis here. After the time threshold, it seems Hamas, children, bomb, rocket, civilians are more likely counted. And for the countries in UK, again, Labour Party, Corbyn, sanction, protest are some important keywords when compared to the US case. But note that these are only descriptive statistics. That's why I went through a bit faster. And at this point, I will leave the floor to Selim and to talk about our STM model.
So in topic modeling, we use STM instead of LDA. Well, as previously mentioned, the LDA doesn't incorporate the metadata. But we added two new dummies in our data set, as Fuat talked about a little bit. One is for the country comparison, US versus UK, and the other one is for the threshold for the moments when the orientation of the conflict switched from Sheikh Jarrah and the settlement issues into the armed conflicts oriented around Gaza and Israel. We also considered and even tried ST-LDA, this short text LDA. This is a model referred by Chris Bailey, especially for the Twitter data. But the thing is, it's so new, last updated a week ago or so on GitHub page. So we couldn't exactly figure out the code's implementation of users. Second, and maybe more importantly, it didn't allow us to make comparisons by country or by time. So we decided to go on with STM. In our STM model, we first needed to trimming. This is maybe a specific detail, but normally the maximum threshold in trimming is set to 90-95% levels. This means that you remove terms if they exist in 90% of the documents, but we thought it would be better to keep it under 30% for our purpose because the topics were so close to each other and contain same words over and over again. And lastly, we put that last bit of code in our STM model to include these two variables, three variables actually, also the day as a continuous variable, days of May, in the STM model. We can continue forward. This is another issue when doing STM. The package has a function for it to decide how many topics we should go. After getting, we randomly sampled 10,000 tweets from the main data set. We tried different number of topics from 5 to 25. So overall, we tested 20 different number of topics for the model improvements. Eventually, the diagnostics told us the optimum number of topics would be around 7 to 10. As you can see, within that range, we can get low residuals and high semantic coherence. If you look at the second and the third plots especially, then we qualitatively looked at the topics within that range, 7 to 10, and we decided to be the ideal number to be 9, because with other numbers, the topics were not so coherent. Ahmet, we can continue to findings.
Then these are our 9 topics. So after documenting these topics, we try to give names or label them for a general topic name. So we can now first talk about those names here. For example, the first one is more related with the humanitarian approach, with the words like human, crime, and stop the war, etc. So, for example, the second one is more about the violence and armed conflict between Israel and Hamas, bombings and rockets, etc. Then the third topic is more about a political or positive approach, like the words people, lives, or law, good, etc. And the fourth topic is more about the US politics. So we see the Biden there, and AMP means American Muslims for Palestine. So this topic is more related with the US Twitter users. And then comes the fifth topic, which is about the settlement issue in East Jerusalem. So we see the top words as East Jerusalem and home, the homes of the people, Palestinians, etc., and forced move, etc. Then the sixth one is more about anti-Semitism. So we see top words Jews, Jewish, Semit, anti-Semit, etc., Zionists. And then the seventh topic is more about the ethics, ethnic origin, Arabs, land, Palestinian. Then the eighth topic is more about the activism. So we see the call for protest, call for action in these topics. For example, on the left table, we see in this eighth topic sanction, word sanction, which is like asking for sanctions towards the companies supporting IDF, Israel Defense Force, which is more relevant for the UK case. And then the last topic is more about the religion. We see God, pray, Christian, and Muslim, and AMP specifically in this topic. So next slide, please. And then the important advantage of STM comes here. So we can incorporate our metadata to our model, and then we can differentiate the distribution of different topics into different groups. On the top graph, we see the distribution of topics towards before the threshold, which we put for 10th of May, which is the start of bombings from Israel and rockets from Hamas. And the the bottom one is shows the distribution of the topics towards US versus UK. And clearly we can see from the top graph that violence and armed conflict is more on the side of after the threshold. On the other hand, before the threshold, before the bombings and rockets, we can see the topic, the discussion on Twitter among Twitter users are more concentrated on settlement issue, which was talked about around the Sheikh Jarrah and anti-Semitism issue, for example. And we will see more clear picture in the next slides. But let me just previous slide, please. Let me just give a couple of words about the second graph. We see that the activism is more relevant and more prevalent actually for the UK case against the US, and the US public generally talk about the violence and armed conflict in a more sense. Next slide, please. And another great advantage of the STM topic is that we can plot the prevalence of each topic across time. And here the x-axis shows the days in May in 2021. So, for example, let me start with the second topic. Here we can see that by the way, let me first show the thresholds. The first threshold we can see here is the time, the first threshold in our study, which is the 6th of May, when the 2 Palestinian civilian killed by Israel police forces in East Jerusalem. So the conflict has started or increased after that date, and after the the second threshold, which is the red one, 10th of May, we see the bombings and rockets between Israel and Hamas. And then 21st of May is the ceasefire. So here in the second topic, we see that the topic around the violence is increasing from the first threshold, and it reached the peak and top between the starting of the bombings and rockets and the ceasefire. As from the first topic, we can see that humanitarian crisis is increasing, and more humanitarian approach is gaining, intensifying within those days as well. And on the other hand, we can see from the third topic that more positive approach or apolitical approach is decreasing with the armed conflict between the threshold, and after the ceasefire, it starts to raise again. And let me not talk all about them for the sake of time. Maybe the fifth topic is important. The main conflict, the starting conflict, was about the settlement issue in East Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah. We can see that the prevalence of that topic is high before the armed conflict, but after the armed conflict, it decreases, as the topic of topic 6, which is anti-Semitism, which follows a similar trend. Another one important here is the topic 8, call for protest and activism. So here we see that when the conflict starts to intensify, there are call for protest, there are activist tweets, and with the armed conflict starting with the bombings, there are call for protests, especially across the UK. And we can see that the peaks and downs follows the days of the week. So through the weekends, the tweets about activism, call for protest is increasing, and it's decreasing during the weekdays. So, for example, the last one, the religion, it's about the more religious content. So the 13th of May is the Ramadan feast. So there are many, and before that, the month of Ramadan, and before the armed conflict, the tension was going around the Aqsa Mosque. So there are many tweets about religion, and after the Ramadan feast, it reduces. Yeah, and in general, just before, can you go back, please? And in general, we can say that with the outcome from these graphs is that with the armed conflict, with the violence, the more long-term topics are decreasing, and people are not talking about the long-term issues when the armed conflict rises, because there are more humanitarian issues, there are more humanitarian crises, and the main focus is changing for the Twitter user, for the public, both in the US and the UK. Next slide, please. So here we can show the distribution of the words before and after the threshold. And for example, before the threshold, the main topic is going for the humanitarian topic. The main words, the most prevalent words are apartheid, genocide, etc. But after the threshold, after the armed conflict, in the humanitarian topic, we see more words like stop war and human crime, etc. Similarly, for the violence topic, before there is no word around Hamas, because Hamas, the issue, the settlement issue is not related with Hamas. It's mainly in the East Jerusalem. But after the armed conflict, the issue, the focus moves from East Jerusalem to Gaza, and the Hamas is the key word after the threshold. Next slide, please. And finally, we can compare each topic across countries. For example, for the UK case, for the topic violence and armed conflict, the main focus is around Gaza, children, civilian, bombs, etc. So we can say that the UK public is mainly focusing on the bombings of Israel rather than the rockets of Hamas. But for the US, it's the opposite. US public is more talking about the Hamas and their rocket attacks. And we can say the similar things for the religion. For example, US, the AMP, as I said, the American Muslims for Public, and it's mainly focused, the main focus of religion topic in the US is around that organization. So that's all from me. Now Selim will conclude.
With this, we've got 4 major limitations, or some of them are actually future research ideas, to put it differently. First one is the lack of causal inference. These were the preliminary results. Of course, we should do more to make a solid case for this change. Second, we wanted to do Barbara's ideology estimation first, but things got complicated and we realized we got a bit ambitious at first. We weren't able to get all friends for users in our dataset. When we get the friends from academic Twitter package, we couldn't run the estimation. This could still be applied though, but we need to spend more time on it to figure out the code side of things. And the third one is when we specified the country name, I thought it would, it would give us the all tweets from the US, but it turns out it only gives us the geocoded tweets. So that's why our sample size was limited with around 57,000 tweets from UK and US. And fourth one is we only included one time point on 10th of May as a threshold, but we should include more conflict events from ACLED dataset probably. Yeah, these are all. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry about the noise. They're cleaning the garden, moving.
It's fine. Congratulations. This is very interesting. I think I don't have any questions. I just have like some comments maybe to help you prepare this as a journal article. You already have done the dyadic difference between the United States and the United Kingdom, and it gives you quite interesting results. Like 2 countries, probably 2 of the most closest countries in the world, are basically diverging so much on an international relations issue. Naturally, my follow-up concern would be, how about other countries, European countries, countries outside of Europe? So I think I've done a similar study for Washington Post 3 years ago. Back then, Al-Aqsa protests were happening. So I did write something on this. And when I internationally mapped all those tweets about the Al-Aqsa conflict, you really did have topical preferences between certain countries and different topical preferences among other countries. But since that was like a newspaper article, I didn't really pursue any causality on it. But I'm very interested in, once this is done internationally, or at least like compare 10 to 15 countries maybe, and try to explain, what drives different prominence of different topic models in different countries. That will become a very interesting international relations article, I think. Do you have any interest in heading towards that direction?
I can answer this question. So, for example, if we consider other, we try to focus on the English tweets because we know the English and we can easily work with that. If we include English tweets from non-English speaking countries, we thought there will be a bias in the selection issue because the English tweeting users in non-English speaking countries represents an elite part of the of those countries, and they won't be comparable with the US, for example. One alternative could be using those international tweets in non-English speaking countries, excluding the US and UK, for example. That might be a good approach as well.
Mm-hmm. Maybe like do English speaking countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, United States, and do like one cluster. But like even if you do like Germany, Switzerland, I don't know, France, Denmark, Sweden, that's going to give you pretty much there's no class difference in those countries that much that you see in other countries that where internet penetration is a class issue, for example. So maybe in order to control for that, but then again, you also have to pitch in wealthy Arab countries that are very active in social media, like Gulf countries, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, that are very, very active in Gaza-related hashtag wars in any context and situation. So it's just that my suggestion would be to try to internationalize this as much as possible, and maybe extend this project, like make this bigger. But if you can give us some kind of insight with regard to international relations over what explains countries' Twitter ecosystems, preference of certain topics and not other topics, that will be something that could be published in a very, very high impact journal, and it will be very good for your careers. And I would be the first person to read that, really.
Yeah. That would be, in that case, the target population will be different. So in that case, we will not be looking at the public opinion in those countries, but more the international discussion on that issue. And that's also interesting, I agree.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from the audience? Let's see if there are any hands. Anybody who wants to ask an international relations question or conflict analysis or conflict sciences related question on this? No one. Okay. I think this paper really has a very promising future. Like, really stick to this, and I really suggest all of you to convert this into an APSA or ISA conference paper and like present it there and see what people say to that. Hope we can actually become part of the the same panel next year in APSA or ISA, because I don't do Gaza, but I look at similar Twitter related foreign policy issues as well. But good job. This is really, really impressive. So before we head on to the next topic, shall we take a 10-minute break so that people can just have a break? So it's 6:30 Istanbul time. Shall we convene together here at 40 past? It'll be good for everyone. So see you in 10 minutes. Which is going to be on social movements. So, all right, cool.
Hi, Hocam. Shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. The presentation will start with the introduction, which will be followed by the brief literature review and the methodology part. And then we are going to present our findings with the conclusion. And social movements and protests are commonly occurring feature of the social and political life. However, the effect of a pandemic on such mobilization have not been investigated in detail. That is why in this research project, we try to explore several computational methods for measuring the impact of coronavirus pandemic on social movements. The COVID-19 has been affecting social, political, and economic dynamics of everyday life, and there have been various government policies to address problems posed by the pandemic with relation to different socioeconomic backgrounds of countries. Lockdowns, restrictions, and physical distancing have complicated the forms of mobilization, and also have led to the rise of social media activism with varying public responses to the government's measures in that manner. And when it comes to the literature, Charles Tilly defines social movements through contention and collectivity, while Della Porte and Mattoni put an emphasis on the network interaction and contention. On the other hand, Touraine sees it as a construction of social reality. And studies on coronavirus, relatively recent, as obvious, Players claimed that COVID-19 triggered the contentions between social movements and capitalist state actors, whereas Dave et al. Studied the risk-avoiding behavior of protesters during the BLM protests. And with that background, we stated our research question as follows. How do different government policies affect protests during the pandemic? And the people respond differently to their government's COVID-19 measures along the North and South dimension. And to be able to answer that question, we have chosen 3 socioeconomically different countries via paying attention to the global North and global South distinction literature. Argentina and South Africa as underdeveloped economies of the South, and United States as the developed country of the North. As you can also see in the slide, in terms of COVID-19 cases, US is the most affected country. And within those cases, there are different reasons of protests, such as dissatisfaction with the government, as we see in Argentina, anti-mask and anti-vaccine protests, as we see in the United States, and financial protests, which took place in the South Africa as a response to lockdown policies of their government. We have only focused on lockdown policies of those states for the Summer Institute. I need to state that. And we determined the time interval of the research according to dates of lockdowns and protests as a sample. And when it comes to the methodology, we collected our data with R and Python through Twitter with academic Twitter package. We retrieved around 140,000 tweets, and our research employs text analysis, sentiment analysis, and the structural topic modeling.
We extracted roughly 35,000 tweets on quarantine in Argentina context, and as a result, we see that obligatory cases, President Chile, House, government, and President names, which name is Alfardes, and as a foreign countries, Spain and Italy. When we look at the bigrams, I think they give us more meaning. And the first one is new cases, and the second one points out the federal district, and Santa Fe is one of the cities of the Argentina. And when we look at the fourth one, Abraham Mateo, who is a singer that writes a song about the quarantina, and he appears more than President Alfardes' name in this table. When we look at the other bigrams, we see that some words related to football appears like football europeo, European football, and jugador favorito, which signifying his favorite footballer. And then we come across with the president name. Yeah. And according to these bigrams, we did a sentiment analysis using NRC dictionary. And the result shows that positive sentiments overlaps the negative ones, and trust is the most prevalent emotions among the other emotions, and the second one is fear. We actually tried to do structural topic modeling, and according to this model, we see that house, present names, Alfardes, Spain, and obligatory governments, and that's Chile, health, and stopped are the most common words actually. And we put these topics in an other way in this here. Here we see that these topics are related to these words are related to different topics. Like first one is related to national related issues such as population measurement, while second one is related to international area. We see that Uruguay and Sebastián Pinera as a Chile's president name. And these topics actually have negative words like pelotudo, and it shows that there are some grievances on this topic. And when we look at the fourth one, we see that we can say that this topic related to economy. And the fifth one also includes the international aspects, as we see that Chile. And we just put it in another dimension, adding perspectives on in our STM to show that. And we did a word cloud to our words, and which is comply with our first results. When we look at the South Africa, which is more interesting than the Argentina context, because it includes alcohol and cigarette bans, and we see that similarly to Argentina, we see president names and government-related words in this table, but also we see police rules and some basic services like food. And diagrams also reveal more meanings on alcohol sales and cigarette sales and delivery services. And actually, these diagrams shows that crime rate and gender-based violence are also most common words in this context. And surprisingly, again, the positive words surpass the negative ones in South Africa context. Yeah. So we did again a structural topic modeling, and as we see from the topic 5, nation need word, these are the most prevalent words in the topic 5, and also topic 4 can give us restrictions over alcohol and government. And when we look at the topic modeling graphs, we see that the topic 1 includes interior affairs and security related issues. The second one points out the government and basic services like health and food, as we see. The topic 3 is related to business and economic area. And the fourth one is clearly includes cigarette and alcohol bans in this context. And we have a word cloud also in this issue. And we separated them as negative ones and positive ones at the right hand. And we see at the left hand whole the frequency, word frequency actually in this cloud.
All right, so I'm the last person to sum up the presentation. So basically, I'll be presenting you what we have found for the United States of America case, which is the one of our northern and economically developed country case. So I think it resembles and carries much more significant or similarities per se toward with the South African case. Why is that? Because here there are also similarities and differences as well, but interestingly, here in the US case, we can see an interest in public circulation, in interest in other countries. Of course, this could be caused by the period that we're observing, but especially, for instance, United Kingdom carries a high prevalence. India, China, or other European countries such as like Spain or Italy, for instance. This could be caused by their high or two for instance, variants or high number of cases in Europe. So it might be in circulation, obviously, in the US context. But interestingly, other, for instance, issue areas such as economy or news, for instance, that shows us a public interest in the issue. Sorry. So when we look at the diagrams, as Gizem mentioned, it gives us more clues in terms of understanding what's going on in the US context, obviously. For instance, the first one, social distancing by far. So we see, so it actually kind of resembles our hypothesis in the sense that in public circulation, there is positive or negative sentiments towards social distancing or lockdown measures as well, as they go mostly in hand. As we can see here, other countries are mostly interested. For instance, Italy, Spain are still here. South Korea is still here. There are obviously some other diagrams that we couldn't fit in the context. For instance, beach boys or Remy surfing. We couldn't locate them in context, obviously. But interestingly enough, there's a kind of a significant amount of interest in Donald Trump, which also gives us the clue in terms of its lockdown policies, both at state level, but at the federal level as well, as I'll come to explain what are the differences or possible significances of those. So as also Gizem mentioned, for the South African case or Argentinian case as well, there's a public sentiments and public emotions side to this. So obviously, and interestingly enough, as Gizem mentioned, it is mostly caused by the NRC dictionary, but we didn't expect trust to be this much high, especially for the United States context, considering the structural racism protests followed by George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests followed through 2013 even. So we see fear, obviously, interestingly enough, or anger as well. And we see much more of a negative public sentiment towards the lockdown policies in the US. But maybe further study could also explore the connotation or the relationship between fear and anxiety. Maybe we could go further into the emotions literature in the Q&A section. So when we look at the structural topic modeling here, we see different kind of circulation of different words as well here. For instance, US coming together with China, and mostly in a domestic context. This could be related to the Trump presidency, which offer the populist account in approaching China, as our vaccine group friends also mentioned as well. The Chinese virus is enough of a big kind of a connotation towards China, accusation even towards China, making a populist statement and othering China, which also made its case, made the cut in the public sentiments. So other ones as well, protests are resemble with what's going on around the world as well, other countries, as well as India and UK, for instance. So continuing with the structural topic modeling here, as you can see how different words are circulating together as well here. For instance, as Gizem mentioned, mostly for the South African case, for the second topic, for instance, we see certain countries with economic issues at the public level. For instance, UK is often associated with economy and Trump as well, the Trump presidency. The topic 3 presents us a different level of analysis. For instance, with India, mostly associated with stay-home measures or lockdown measures. Topic 4 mostly is related with protests. And topic 5 brings us the issue, brings us the relationship between US and China, as I mentioned earlier. Here's another representation of what we have talked basically. So I'm over 15 minutes, so I'll be wrapping up in a short while. So here are word clouds for the United States case. As you can see, the positive and negative cases are, and sorry for the swearing words, we couldn't, I mean, it's also a reality of the US case we had to deal with them as well in this context. But at the same time, as a summary, we see a lot of relationship with other countries and public resentment in relationship with other European countries or India and China as well. So there is definitely a negative sentiment towards lockdown measures as well, as our early study concludes. So in conclusion, we came to this issue from a literature review and with the literature gap per se, followed by the socioeconomic backgrounds of different countries. And as we have also talked with Erdem Yörük and his colleagues as well during the week, it is mostly associated with the North-South gap and the social movements literature, followed by online activism literature as well. For the limitation section, as our Israel-Palestine group friends also mentioned, we also encounter several errors. Maybe Gizem would like to comply and give more insights on that. But we will definitely, for the further studies, need for a larger server to extend the time periods we are analyzing. Obviously, we have a low number of observations compared to our hypotheses as well. So in general, our main purpose for further studies is to theorize social movements in a comparative setting, followed by the North-South gap, followed by the literature, obviously. So does the reality of the pandemic force us to reevaluate the robustness of existing social movement theories? So with that, our further article research, thanks to Hakan Hocam's feedback, we will probably focus on doing a one-year-long survival analysis, extending our data frame, and to see how long does each anti-government phase last. So the duration will be at utmost importance to us in our further studies. With that, having the word to present as well among my friends, these are my references as well, but we also would like to thank everyone who took part, especially Hakan Hocam and Emre, who designed SICSS as well. So since we have the word, we would like to thank them with a sincere heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I have one question because I did not really understand the data collection phase very well. Did you collect these data from like protests and social movements, or are you only looking at Twitter data? Because that's very important regarding whether you can call this a social movement research or not. I didn't understand. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, thank you, Hakan. Maybe I would like to say something. So I would like to give the word to Gizem, maybe, as she's more keen on responding to data frame.
We actually take into consideration these protests when we look at when we select these countries. But we started our collection from the government's declaration on lockdown.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so government declares a lockdown. Your collection starts, and in between you may have protests or social movements, or you may not have social movements. You're taking all of them.
Yeah. Actually, in South Africa and the USA case, we collect these data considering these protests.
So these Twitter data are from protests in all countries.
Sorry?
So this data comes from protests in all countries. So in all countries you have protests. So you collected data from the protests.
No, we just determined the keywords as a lockdown, and we collected our data with this keyword in the country context.
So then when you're revising this paper, the first thing that needs to be done is that if you're calling this a social movement research, then you have to collect data from social movements.
Yes, actually, but we didn't have enough capacity in terms of our computers, and we have to limit it ourselves. So we found the way to do this. I mean, we wanted to extend this research, actually, extending protest events.
Okay, so my suggestion is this. You can go about this in two ways. One, you can go up to newspapers and actually log the dates in which you had protest events. Like, for example, April 1st, April 2nd, April 3rd in the United States. Then, I don't know, May 7th, May 8th, May 9th in South Africa. And then collect data for these dates for these individual countries. That's one way to do it. The second way to do it is to collect specific protest-related hashtags or keyword combinations, so that I understand that these tweets come from actual social movements. Because mentioning something on Twitter during a social movement isn't necessarily social movement data. That's a very important thing. They may be using those keywords when they're taking a selfie for whatever reason, or when they're ordering a hamburger from, I don't know, a takeout joint. Like, it can refer to anything. So the first thing to do would be to collect data from actual social movement events, not data that happens outside and around social movements. So that will be the first thing. And you can do it in two ways. Dates specific data collection. You specify the dates. Since you already have Twitter academic access, it allows you to go back in time to get, you don't have academic, I can help you get academic access. So then you can take, extract these data from certain dates or dates phases, or you can find, you can look at those tweets manually, and for each country, for example, George Floyd for the United States, you can't really find, I mean, you can find it in other countries, but when you compare it to other countries, you're going to have a huge George Floyd hashtag mountain compared to the others. Or do these through hashtags, because it's very, very, very difficult, because Erdem Yörük and his research team also reported extensively on how difficult and painstaking it is to get verified, clean, proper data from actual social movement events. And they are spending hundreds of thousands of euros just to solve these problems, and still they have problems. So this is something that would also, we already recorded their talk, so you can revisit their talk and listen to it again. But this is good as an exploratory analysis. So first phase of analysis, so you understand what kind of hashtags exist in every country. But then you have to go into the second step. You have to narrow down your search terms and your search criteria, so that you focus individually on those social movement events, either date-wise or hashtag or keyword combination-wise. Then you can say that we're doing social movement research. That's very, very important. So it's very important to enter into this analytical challenge from the right place as early as possible. But I mean, of course, like, respect to the amount of time and effort that went into this research. These are just like recommendations, so that you first prepare this for a conference presentation and then for a journal issue. So Meri Hocam, next up, let's listen to you.
Thank you so much. I mean, first of all, let me apologize to the third team. I missed their presentation, got an impromptu call. And also that's why I couldn't actually ask my question to the third presenters either, but that was on bots, and I'm pretty sure they already received a lot of questions considering the expertise in the room. So just to echo what Akın Hocam already said, I mean, looking at the keywords that you end up with, in the case of Argentina, for example, you get jugador favorito, which I assume is Messi in this case. You do not really get much about social movements and protests from that. So that, I actually was thinking also of Erdem Hoca's project, and I believe what you try to do here can contribute to what they already have been doing in their ERC project. But I mean, that can also be in a way inspiration for you to follow similar steps. But I also was just thinking, why these three countries to start with? What is the selection criteria? Because I mean, I can see how you try to pick a country from the global south, a developed country, i.e. USA, and then BRICS, in a way, a country in between. But I mean, comparing the social movements in these countries is going to, I would believe, require you to walk some extra miles to make a case for, you know, a robust social science research. And because in the case of Argentina, we talk about a country that has been facing severe economic crises over the course of decades now. And so the issues that are really pressing there is going to be very different than the case of the US. Comparing the cases of the US and South Africa could be easier in that there are some racial issues that have been surfacing and both countries have been actually coping with. In the case of Argentina, once again, I mean, the main issue had to do with, and so these actually speak to different literatures as well. Again, I'm not an expert of social movements per se, but I can imagine how once this is sent out for review, if assigned to people coming from these different literatures, they can actually look for some clarification onto why you selected these, and can you compare these cases as straightforwardly as you pictured them to be. I'll pause here because I also saw, I think Onur Hocam raised his hand first, but I guess ladies first gave me the advantage, so.
Sorry, Onur Hocam, please go ahead.
Thank you.
No apologies needed. I mean, nothing to worry. So I was just gonna wanted to echo what Hakan Hoca was saying. Like the data collection part is a crucial first step because most of the results really depends on what type of initial data set you start with, and it's always a precision recall type of setting. So you might be really specific what keywords that you want. Let's say if you are studying Gezi Park Mood, Diren Gezi might be a really nice hashtag to start with. But then the social movements are also evolved. There are other relevant hashtags. So then if you target specific one hashtag, maybe you are high precision, but you may be missing lots of other relevant hashtag, relevant conversation along the way. But if you throw your net too wide and you try to capture lots of different hashtags, let's say hashtag Istanbul, then you might capture lots of irrelevant things, but probably among these sets, there is a portion that is really about the social movements. So that's why you need to make a good trade-off between which keywords to include, which one to exclude. And I find network analysis is providing a nice solution in that regard. So because in Twitter, there's usually a good common practice to use multiple hashtags within a tweet, especially in the social protest settings. And if you build a hashtag co-occurrence network, you can identify different groups. Sometimes they polarize, supporting and against. Sometimes you might see both are try to getting involved and try to kind of like piggyback some popular hashtags. So you can totally discard them, exclude them from the analysis. And within the network, you might also look at the core of the network. So the ones that are highly co-occurring with others, and maybe first doing a test collection with a popular hashtags, and then doing a network analysis to identify which hashtags to kind of like attack and then recollect the data. So that approach usually works. And then with the hashtag, you may consider building a social network like the interaction network, retweets and mentions. And you might also eliminate or identify the active users or some bypassers, like maybe mentioning a hashtag once. So you might also find the core participants of the events. So I guess these are my 5 cents in that regard, like from the data collection point of view. But the overall analysis is really nice. I guess I can understand like collecting 3 different countries, 3 different social movement data within a week is a big concern and limitation, I guess.
And
but
2 different
given enough time, I guess you guys can do absolutely fantastic job.
Thank you very much, Hocam. We can go further, actually, ideology estimation from your point. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for this presentation?
I actually have a little one.
Yeah.
When you do the emotion analysis for the the specific emotions. There's a difference in the fear. It was not that high in South Africa. And also there was an alcohol ban in South Africa. Do you have any speculation about it?
Yeah, actually, it may be emanated from the NRC dictionary package, and our words actually contain lots of positive words according to these dictionary packets. For that reason, it might be high, and we are actually trying to solve this issue. I mean, I think dictionary-based sentiment analysis is not valid. I don't know. Yeah.
Again, were you referring to the alcohol ban leading to some? Okay, I see. There may be a correlation.
Yeah. I have a hint about it, but Gizem said they don't trust the analysis. So maybe we can
alcohol and cigarettes. Like I can totally see that happening in Turkey.
Yeah.
All right. Any final questions for this? No. Okay. So then let's move on to our final project, the Manifesto project, which I have some idea about what it is, and I think it's very, very interesting. You guys are going to have a lot of fun with this, I think. So let's go with the final project.
Okay, awesome. Let me just set up the presentation or the screen sharing. Actually, before I do that, I noticed that Ozan and Oguzhan are located in the same area. Seems that you guys are close by. 1 second.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for staying this late for our presentation.
All right. Is there a way to just share one part of the screen? Or
I think you can select which screen you can share from the share screen section.
I think you guys see everything here.
Yeah, we can. Then you can just maximize that, and yeah.
Okay, cool. I guess.
Yes. So our group is me, Venia, Oguzhan, and Didar. Actually, our project was motivated by something maybe almost all researchers face during their research. Like one big problem everyone faces, limitation of data, right? Especially researchers who work with existing data. We mostly say, like, the data set I worked with had only this time frame, or only these countries, or only these variables. And after this, like, very inspiring 3-4 weeks with SICSS and listening to all these like amazing research, we like constantly thought about how we can, I don't know if replacing is the right word, maybe expanding like existing data sets by using computational techniques. And one data set we used within the framework of this summer school was a Manifesto project database. To give some information about what this database is, it basically includes all political parties' election manifestos, the ones like they declare before every election term. So Manifesto project database has PDFs for these manifestos for every party from countries, like over 50 countries in 5 continents. And we have more than 1,000 parties from 1945 until today. So what does this manifestos tell us? Like, we basically understand parties' political positions on multiple issues. There are some examples here for some variables from the original data set, but we put these just to give you an idea about the broadness of the data set. Like, for example, foreign special relationships as both positive and negative connotation. Also, there are variables on controlled economy, environmental protection, surface issue, European Union, healthcare, human rights, intellectual property. You can think of anything. That's why we chose this data set, because, I mean, it's not only for political scientists, but we think like people who work from different fields, they can all like benefit from this data set, because by looking at party manifestos, we understand political parties' positions on multiple issues and their policy agenda once they are elected and once they come to power, what they will do as a government. And in the literature, we also know that political parties' policy agendas are not static, so they change over time. They basically respond to public opinion. As key events develop in society, like terrorist attacks, pandemic, diseases, big social movements, as prior group talked about, the salience of issues change too. So we expect parties to change their rhetoric and their emphasis on different issues. They can do that by emphasizing the issues they have ownership over, so like the issues they are known with, or they can just talk about the issues voters concern most. Yeah, so to be able to understand all of this, we wanted to use the computational methods, because the existing data set does this only by hand coding. So they have big group of researchers, they have country experts, they hire and train people. It is, I mean, it's not hard to predict that. It's very time consuming, labor intensive, and very expensive, especially if you want to create a new variable. It's not possible because they already have their list of variables and they work with only those. But we thought if we can develop a model, we can create new variables. But before that, we wanted to make sure the methods we use and the models we develop match with the existing results in the data set. So with this assignment, we want to just compare with what we found and what is in the existing data set. We can go. So once this, as we develop this project further in the future, we will be able to track how party manifestos change over time and how the key issues lead to this change. And we can also see how different parties from different ideological backgrounds talk about issues differently. We can't expect right-wing parties talk about international wars the same way left-wing parties does. So once we develop our ideas better and we have completed data set, we'll be able to answer these questions in a less period of time. And Didar will give you more information about how we did so far.
Yeah, thank you, Cigdem. I want to talk a bit about our process. Of course, we cleaned the data, did some pre-processing, removed stop words and all of the standard things. And then we wanted to do topic modeling to extract which topics were most commonly talked about in these manifestos. And then our idea was to apply some sentiment analysis on the topics that we found, that we were able to identify. And then, since these manifestos are so rich, we thought we could also see how these countries talk about each other. And so we were able to track some foreign relations. And then one last thing is we tracked out some things to do with word embeddings, and Venia is going to talk more about that in detail. Yeah, we can pass. Like I said, our data set was so large, but for this limited time, we decided to just focus on one election, the 2008 election in the US. And so the parties that we focused on most was Republicans and the Democrats. And we first decided to divide each manifesto into smaller parts, because then to apply sentiment analysis, we would have to make sure that this part was just about one thing that we were able to detect. And so we did that. And after making these smaller, we ran structural topic modeling. In the previous presentations, we realized that people also use this. So I'm going to skip talking about that in more detail, but it basically allows us to estimate a topic model by using the metadata as well. And then we can see some of the topics here. We see some thing about healthcare. We see things about Iraq, support to Israel, globalization, technology, climate. So we realized that we could extract a lot of topics, and we can move on to the next slide. And then we were able to see who was talking about what the most. And so we can see that Republicans tend to talk more about marriage in the 2008 manifesto and national security, whereas the Democrats, for example, talked about healthcare and insurance more. We know that it's a key part of Obama's campaign. So yeah, now I give it over to Cigdem again.
Yeah. So as I tried to describe earlier, not all, but some of the variables in the Manifesto project dataset have positive and negative context as two different variables. So like the example I gave was foreign relations, positive and negative. So to be able to get that, we want to use sentiment analysis, and we used balanced aware dictionary. But then we did more research and we found that one was mostly used for social media data, so maybe not ideal for our case. But the idea behind it raised the words from -4 to 4. As Didar said, with this presentation, we present only a very small percentage of the whole data, only one election. But the results, maybe we can show the results with the next slide. Yeah, these are ranked based on the dominance of these topics. And we can see how Democratic and Republican sentiments were different. We mostly see positive sentiments here. So we have mixed results. We don't have one big finding we can confidently present here. But we can see security Israel issues were more dominant in Democratic manifesto, while patients, healthcare was more in Republican manifesto, Republican Party's manifesto. They both had sentiment. So we can read this table in the following way, all these different topics and different sentiment values.
Right, so the question that I was interested in, coming from a IR background, was if we could use manifestos as a proxy for international relations, like official government relations between states. A couple of things have been done in the past where they've looked at parliamentary data and instances of other countries being mentioned. Social media, like public diplomacy, is another mode of measuring relations between the people of different countries. What we wanted to do was look at okay, on the political manifesto level, can we use this as a measure of international relations? So for each manifesto, we found instances of other countries being mentioned. This required getting a data set of all countries and the demonyms for those countries. And for this, we relied on Wikidata. So Wikidata is this just brilliant and amazing thing that connects all Wikipedia articles together. And we were able to get a query which got every single country and the demonyms for that country in English. Then we found the contexts of that country being mentioned in a manifesto. So I think we chose the neighboring 5 words before and after to act as a proxy of what are the contexts for when that country is brought up. And then we track the evolution of these contexts. So here's one fun example for Vietnam. So we track the language associated with Vietnam in the different manifestos from 1964 all the way to 2016. So we find that the Democrats mostly focused on veterans, North, return years. Some of these words make sense, others don't. Veterans, war, unemployment. Whereas the Republican language was more military focused, war, South, troops, Cambodia. We see veterans again. The Republicans are focused on expanded, communist, continued health. Then after the war, I guess we see the Vietnam syndrome take place, and the Republican dialogue switches to focus more on benefits, expand, disability, veterans. We see that after the war, the Republicans start using this kind of language. So this lets us temporally track the evolution of a country, and you can do the same thing you can imagine with other issue areas as well. So we had a couple other examples, like the Cyprus context, which relates directly with the data that Cigdem was talking about earlier, where we can use the language associated with Cyprus and the Cyprus issue to quantify the scores that these people are doing before. And this is just some initial steps moving in this direction. And this is the language for Iraq. It's fun to look at Democrats versus Republicans, the way they talk about Iraq. And especially in 2008. So like, whereas the war ending, we need to end responsibly. 2008, the Republicans were still adamant of staying in Iraq just because it was Bush's war and everything. I won't get too much into this for the sake of time. The next idea which we had was, well, can we use word embeddings to somehow augment some of our initial analyses? There were two ideas that we had about how we could use word embeddings. One was projecting onto cultural or political dimensions that we create within the vector space. And the other one was like create a document embedding, similar to one of the other groups which did some doc2vec work. So this was the motivation for it. It comes from a paper called Geometry of Culture. And what they did is they created a word embedding, I think, on the Google Texts data. And they took words like rich words and poor words, and subtract the two vectors. And then you can project all the other words onto this vector. Same with like feminine and masculine words. And so you find that golf is a very rich sport, tennis is another very rich sport, and other issues are pretty poor. So you can imagine a similar plot only for like trade and welfare, or like growth and wages. So you can like develop these concepts, more political concepts, and then project different party manifestos onto them to see the association between them. So yeah, so first for the political dimensions, as I said before, we ran word2vec on the entire corpus of all the English manifestos. We define document vectors by taking the mean over the words that are used within that document. So like for each word used within that document, we average over all the words, the weighted average. Then we define social vectors by taking two opposing concepts and subtracting the vectors. So like, so I moved the little camera thing. So like, these are the trade focused party and manifestos. So like 1997 Reform Party of Canada. So the lower the score, the more it's focused on trade, and the higher the score, the more it's focused on welfare. So the Reform Party of Canada, the Liberal Party of Canada in 2004, which if you remember, I'm not sure if you know, but it was Paul Martin's year, NDP's Reform Alliance. So these parties manifestos tend to be focused more on trade, and these party manifestos tend to be focused more on welfare. So the Democratic Unionist Party, the Liberal Party of the 1980, which was actually Pierre Elliott Trudeau's year, and he had this grand vision of like improving so the social fabric of Canada, and so on. So like in theory, we can create these dimensions for anything. We have a function written which like you input any two words, any two concepts that you want to study, and then after it projects all the political parties or countries onto these axes. And then after what we were able to do for the second goal, if you remember, was the doc2vec idea. Was the doc2vec idea, where we can create a vector for every single one of these political parties, and then like compare how they relate to one another. And really, this idea comes from Professor Unber's idea, which was to find diffusion of ideas across party manifestos. So like, where is globalization first mentioned? After, how does that diffusion take place to other parties? Which ideas are similar? Which ideas are different? We weren't able to come up with a final product solution to how to measure diffusion, unfortunately. But here we have like the Scottish National Party, and the most similar political manifestos were the Labour Party. Unfortunately, there was no option to set a year here as well. But like, you get to like get this embedding of party manifestos into the semantic space, which I think is pretty cool.
All right. So as my friends indicated, there are some parts and qualities of our research that need improvement. So to further develop our project, we devised some steps to follow. So we have 2 slides for the next steps part. As our project concerns both the methodological question now of how useful are the computational techniques when analyzing text data compared to hand coding, and also like theoretical research question regarding the characteristics of political communication in election manifestos. So because of that, we divided our next steps into 2 categories. So firstly, with regards to methodology, we want to expand our analysis to include more countries and a wider time span. So far, we could only look at the 2008 US presidential elections. So our first limitation was related to hardware and software. So we need a better server and computers and more time for that. And the second limitation is the language barriers. So now we are searching methods for cross-lingual sentiment analysis and topic modeling. So this issue also relates to the problem with word analogies when conducting word embedding. So word embeddings are meant to capture semantic relations between words. So we want to tune the embedding to capture those relations. We are also searching for a method to do that. So actually, what would you suggest for the testing of word analogies to capture semantic similarities in different contexts? Actually, this is a question we direct you. So for the sentiment analysis, we also want to check what kind of result a supervised model, supervised machine learning approach would yield. Unfortunately, we need a lot of qualitative manual coding in the first step to do that. So it's the next step for now for us. And lastly, we started doing our project discussing the viability of hand coding approach and computational methods as an alternative. So our utmost goal is to compare the project manifesto dataset coding, coding of variables, and our results, basically to see whether we can add new variables or could we validate them. The main difference between our approach and theirs is that theirs is deductive, whereas ours is inductive, so it has the potential of generating a new theory or like new variables. So to next step, please, share a slide. So getting deeper into the social science part of the issue, we did not really have time to dive into the literature on political communication and the framing of political issues. So our first goal is to study these theories better. Secondly, we are aiming at answering these research questions of we are just aiming at learning more about the diffusion of ideas across different parties or different countries, and also we would like to analyze the change in main key issues through time. So actually, we were thinking about using doc2vec package to analyze the spread of ideas, so that we will be able to compare manifesto to manifesto. And this was the last one. Thank you for listening us, and also the great program. So yeah, you're finished. Thank you.
Cool. This was very interesting. I was interested in this project because I really want to see what inspires different ideologies to adopt political principles across different time frames and across different countries. For example, what are center-right neoliberal principles, and how do other political parties decide to import ideas or export ideas, or in terms of like political left or socialist parties? How can we see how ideas spread across different parties based on time and space? That's a very fascinating project. And if you can really broaden the scope of this paper and include, I don't know, at least like most European parties and some maybe like Middle Eastern and North African parties, you're going to see how political ideas and ideologies spread from first world countries into kind of developing countries and emerging markets. That will be like very publishable research. So this is quite an interesting project. So I'm going to give the floor directly to Onur Hocam.
Thank you, Hakan Hocam. I mean, that was super cool. First, like the data is quite interesting. I think it's kind of like a gold mine for my data scientist instinct. So it's quite an interesting data. And the second is, I think the diffusion of ideas is quite relevant. But I was thinking when I was listening to your presentation and another research problem maybe. So when a new party founded, are they filling an empty areas that the, let's say, citizens of these countries looking for? Or there are new parties, they are just really similar to the already existing parties, and what would be the consequences of that? So what really triggers an emergence of a new party in an electoral system was the question pops into my mind. So maybe the embeddings for each party may kind of like capture that sense. So if the new parties are similar or distant from the already existing parties in a country, maybe that will be a proxy to address that. So I just want to ask, like, what do you guys think about it? And the other question is, like, these manifestos are one time, right? Or do you have the manifestos for the same party over the years or over each election cycle?
Yeah, very quickly to the second one. We have manifestos from parties for every election. So they change before every election. But sometimes parties disappear. Sometimes, as you said, there's a new party founded, but they update, maybe not much. Like, it depends. Like, some parties use the same manifesto with just little adjustments. Some parties radically change it. But we have new documents for every election.
That's actually much nicer, much fine resolution data. Oh.
Yeah, the data is really, you're right, a gold mine. And to answer your first question, I think that the question is really good. Like, what happens when new parties join? My initial instinct is, yes, they probably would be filling some gap topically. And one of the benefits of this textual analysis is it really does capture these like topical relations. So you could imagine that it fills up a new area of the dimensionality reduction probably to see it. And then after, what could be interesting, which relates to Professor Unver's comment, is like which parties, external parties, formed the views of this new party. Like how can we, like, if we don't have any history on this party, which other parties can we use as a model for this party? And another idea that I have, which is probably not going to work because the data is just, we really don't have a lot of data. It's like several hundred manifestos, but like looking at which parties mention each other and then running like some embedding of like using the manifesto as the word and then the other parties that are mentioned as the context window. And you can imagine having this beautiful like network emerging of like relationship between different manifestos based on how much they mention one another, or the countries would also work for that. But then again, you really need a lot of data to do something like that, which we don't have.
Yeah, Yasemin.
Thank you very much for this presentation. This sounds like a very fascinating project. I'm also really interested in like party manifestos for applied reasons, but something that I don't know if this is going to be interesting for you, but something that I found interesting is how parties identify themselves. Like they may call themselves social democratic in Sweden and then in Turkey, but then how much difference there is in terms of their agendas, like the type of identity they take, and then what they actually present in their party manifestos might be different, might not be different, and then they may also change from one country to the another. What we may think as like the typical example is obviously how Americans use the term liberal in their context and how it changes in the European context. But I think that there's so much difference in the way the word like social democratic is used, like what they understand from policies. This is just based on my readings. I don't really have like large level of data sets, but this, I thought like when listening to your presentation, this would be something really interesting to see.
Also, adding to your point, there's another issue regarding regarding whether these political manifestos are actually read by the people, by the voters. This is like also like a similar issue in that sense. Yeah, but yeah, thank you for the point.
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, what Ozan said last was like one of the most common critics to this project, like this data set. Like voters don't read manifestos. Like I do PhD in political science, but I don't read manifestos. So like even like people who are not very interested in political science, we don't expect them to read. But there are studies showing the correlation between what party leaders say on the street, on the TV, and what they say on their manifesto. So there's a high correlation between election campaign rhetoric and manifesto and what they do after. So that's like that gives us a little bit confidence to use manifesto project. And to Yasemin's point, like my friends can jump into the group. That's a very interesting point. like think that can be done and would be very interesting because there is already a variable measures party ideology. So we can use that, like how parties are labeled in terms of ideology, and then compare policy positions. It could be interesting because we know how they're labeled. Thank you.
Cool. Any other question for this? No.
I just
People
have
are talking. Yeah. What?
a little superficial method question.
Yeah, please, please.
How did you create the network model? Where did you create it? I just wonder.
Yes. You mean the visualization with there's this amazing software which I recommend anybody who's ever working with embeddings to use. Let me send you the link. It's called the TensorFlow Embedding Projector. And basically what it lets you do is it lets you upload vectors and their metadata. And after you upload the vectors, you can run a t-SNE in here. You can run a UMAP. You can define the dimensions themselves. And it really is like quite powerful. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. I'll start to wrap this up. So if you have any like technical or theoretical question, this would be a good time to ask them. Otherwise, I'm going to get emotional and go into the emotional phase of the Summer Institute. So the section up until now is the most favorite part of the entire year for me. I really look forward to the Summer Institute. This person is this point is the least favorite part of the entire semester because Summer Institute is ending. We get emotional, whatever. Normally, if we had done this physically in person, they would be cakes. We have a cake party, basically. You know, cakes, tea and coffee, and it's really, really fun. But since we don't, let me search for reactions for a cake. I don't have a cake, I just have this. But yeah, I mean, let me hear a little bit like feedback. Like, did you guys like this? Did you